Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about what it's like to go to funerals and how those experiences go. And so I've been to a fair amount of funerals. Some of them I was not training to be psychic, to be a medium. So I have a good chunk that I experienced before I was psychic and then as well as after being psychic. So I have a really cool kind of like contrast to be able to look between before and after I developed my psychic abilities. So if you like psychic development tips and tricks, please subscribe because that's all of what I'm about here on this channel. Today, I'm just going to be talking about me and my experiences because it's our Halloween October video. I know that some of you guys did expect to see a spirit kind of haunted tour, and I'm sorry it fell through, but I will let you guys know that I'm going to be talking about that more, and you're going to be getting a second Halloween video next week. I've got a vlog of kind of like what it's like to be a psychic and have all of the events and the craziness that comes with Halloween times. Now, before I jump into all of these experiences, I first wanted to talk to you guys about something that's super important to me. Basically right now, if you've been on YouTube, you probably know of Mr. Beast. Mr. Beast recently raised a ton of money to basically save the trees. He planted a bunch of trees, raised all this money to kind of help save our planet. And now he's doing it again, but with the oceans. And his plan is to sort of get all these YouTube creators on board and spread the message. And he wants to raise $30 million to remove 30 million pounds of trash out of the rivers, the beaches, and the oceans. So for every $1 donated, they are going to remove 1 pound of trash, and that is huge. This is super important to me because as an animal communicator, I see those animals, I see the ocean, and I see what we're doing to them, and I really want them to be able to have a great life. I also want, my son and my kids to basically learn that we need to take care of the planet that we are on. I think it's energetically so important to give back to the earth. So if you want to see more details on how they are doing it, I'm going to link Mr. Beast's video down below and probably put it up in the cards as well. But even if you can't financially donate something today, that's okay. One of the things that you can do is you can go out and just pick up some trash. I'm in Colorado, I'm landlocked, I don't have oceans, but I do have rivers, and that trash in the rivers leads to the oceans. So that's one of the ways you can help. You can grab a trash bag next time you're out on a walk, heck, every time you're out on a walk, and try to pick up trash as you see it. But if you can, donate some money to TeamSeas.org. I will link all of those things in the description below. I would so appreciate that you guys do this. It's so important to me and so important to our planet. All right, back to the funeral content. So before I get into my experiences, I just want to talk about the ethics of all of this really quick. So a lot of you that are watching, I know, are intuitives. Some of you guys are professionals, some of you guys are learning. But as you learn to communicate with spirits, it's so tempting when you go to funerals to use it as practice. And I just want to say that funerals are never, ever a good time to do any sort of readings. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when I get to kind of like some of my examples. But overall, just not a good time. We need to let people grieve. We need to let people heal. And having somebody come in and offer a reading or, hey, this is what grandma's saying, can be very confusing to people. Rule number 2, I think, is really for those of you who are very empathic. You really got to be super good about your boundaries going into a funeral, because not only are there a ton of people around you that are feeling emotions, but you might be picking up on that spirit. So it's super important to maybe arrive to the funeral early to kind of block out all of that energy, to purposely say, okay, no, I'm not going to talk to any spirits today. I am not going to let anybody else's emotions affect me. It's very important that you protect yourself energetically. Otherwise, it can just be so overwhelming. Now, obviously, it's a funeral. You're probably going because you've lost someone. And that's always hard. And, I'm not trying to say like completely shut down to everything. But at the same time, like if you are very intuitive, sometimes it might be better to sit out on the funeral, or if they're having a live stream, maybe catch it that way. It all depends on your level of sensitivity and kind of how much stuff like this impacts you, especially large crowds. I will say that what happens to me at funerals is because I set those boundaries, I kind of am shutting down everything, and it affects my emotions too. So I kind of shut down my emotions because I'm not allowing anything in. I'm not trying to tune into anything. And so I am not like the one to cry at a funeral. I will go home and cry. And I think, you know, just also understand that, you know, if you have a family member or a friend or somebody who is psychic and they seem, well, heck, if there's just anybody that seems to be grieving in a different way than you, it's not wrong. They might just be needing to do it because that's what's safest for them. I'm sorry, this red mark, I've just been like scratching myself. All right, let's talk about the funerals. Okay. Now, I am a journal keeper. To prepare for this video, I basically went through all my journals because I saved every like obituary and thing that, you know, happened in my life. And so this is the first funeral I went to. This was, let's see, when was this? 2008. So this is the year that I met my husband. I was still several years from learning to be a psychic. So this was like dad's cousin's son, I think. So I'd never met this guy. I didn't really know of him. Even really, I met him for the first time when we went to his funeral. We just went because we wanted to pay respects for the family. And without having psychic abilities, I do remember that this first funeral, you know, and these first ones that I wasn't psychic, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, but this one I do remember, this was the first open casket. First funeral, first open casket. And I just remember looking at the body and thinking, like, that's not him. Why are we showing off his body? Like, he was so just gone. Like, I think that was the first realization, like, for me, how much we are not attached to our bodies. And seeing this kind of like shell of a person and not feeling any sort of life behind it was a very interesting sensation for me as a young person. I was like 16 at the time. But I think I just remember really my big takeaway from that funeral was just like, why are we focusing on the body? Like, and to me, you know, I get it. Everyone has their own personal like religion and beliefs. But to me, this is not who the person is. And I think that probably also helped affirm some of my beliefs moving forward of kind of like what the soul is and what happens to it. And so, I don't know, there was just a bizarre situation because I just felt like, why are we sitting here and putting on display something that is not him, if that makes sense. And I remember feeling very creeped out, and looking back at it now, I probably was feeling something, but it could have been just the group energy of like, things are weird and spooky because we've got an open casket and this is weird. I have so many journals, you guys. So this next funeral, I saved the obituary. This was my grandfather, so my dad's dad. And this was the first funeral that sort of impacted me a little bit more because it was somebody I knew. I definitely was more emotional about this funeral because it was my grandfather, and I still talk to him all the time. He's probably one of the family members that I talk to most in spirit. The funeral, I was, again, not psychic for. I hadn't really, I mean, yes, I was psychic, but I hadn't been training to be psychic yet. And that funeral, I just remember, I remember that there was a singer. There was a guy who was singing a sad song, and he had this country twang that was so deep, and like, I'm not making fun of him at all, but it was just like, it was something out of a movie where it was just like embarrassing to watch this guy sing. And I wasn't the only one kind of like laughing, or not even laughing. I wasn't laughing, but I was like smiling, like, oh my gosh, this is really happening right now. And I remember looking at some of my other cousins and then being like, and I think I remember feeling so guilty afterwards for having any sort of positive emotion at a funeral. I was like, oh, I'm not supposed to do that. But it was just like a funny moment. And this guy was just, he thought he was a really good singer. He was not. That's it, really. I think the reason why I tell that story is I think everyone deals with funerals in their own way. And some people are very uncomfortable with emotions. And sometimes people laugh. And so some people are like, oh my gosh, that is the most inappropriate time to do that. Again, I didn't like laugh, but I fall on the tendency of like not expressing my emotions probably the correct way. And I think that a lot of people are like that. And it's so important that we don't shame people for that. Everyone goes through their own emotional journey when it comes to grief and loss. I think my biggest takeaway from this funeral was how much God was pushed and how much it was pushed in association with fear and with death. And, you know, the pastor was very much like taking advantage of the fact that all these people were here and thinking about, oh, shoot, one day I'm going to die soon. And he was almost using it as a tool to be like, hey, come to Christianity, come convert, because you're going to be here one day too, and you're going to have to deal with this, and you should, you know, go to heaven and not hell. And I remember leaving and being so angry that this pastor spent 85% of the time talking about, you know, bringing people into this church instead of my grandfather. And I'm still mad about it today, but at that time I was sort of pushing away from Christianity, and so that kind of really reaffirmed that. I've since healed those feelings towards that community. I know that's not everybody, and I know that small town churches cannot do things the best, but I just felt like it was inappropriate, and I felt that it furthered my push away from Christianity and into kind of my more spiritualist beliefs at this time. And then the third and the final funeral that I went to before I was psychic was my great-grandmother on my dad's side. She lived in another state for all of my life. I maybe saw her twice my whole entire life, so I wasn't that close to her, but we went in support of her, and it was a very, very tiny funeral, very small, and I think it was also an open casket. I this time did not go look at the body. I had a very, you know, clear memory of that last open casket situation, which I forgot to say my grandpa's was not open casket, and I was very appreciative for that. But I remember thinking, that's not the person I want to remember, is that face in the casket. I want to remember them as they were. And that funeral was pretty short. I feel like there's not a whole lot to say. Honestly, the thing that I loved most about it was that I was with my family and we were hanging out and having a good time. And, you know, on the bookends of this funeral, we just had really good family time together. And I think that's one bittersweet thing that happens with funerals is it's like everyone savors their time more together. And so I think funerals can honestly be a beautiful thing in some ways. And so that was kind of my memory of that. I didn't really think much about, you know, her being a ghost or anything like that, just because it was such a short funeral. So around this time, this was 2011, I had lost my grandfather, my great-grandma, and then my dog. So all of this actually happened within a year. And this is what started my journey towards becoming a psychic, and I have a ton of other videos on that. But something about that just felt like a wake-up call. I'm like, I'm having so many of these experiences. I'm really wanting to connect with these people on the other side. I went to see psychics, and I'm like, I want to do this. This sounds cool. And so that's when I took all these classes and became psychic, became a medium. And I learned how to do it, practiced it for many, many years. And then the next funeral that happened, I honestly don't remember the year. I know it was before I got married, which was in 2017. And this was my husband's grandmother. I had met her a few times. I really loved her energy. She was such a great, fun, humorous person. And it was a really sudden thing that happened. And it was something that I think my husband had gone there for Christmas. And then literally like days later, it happened and he went right back and I went back with him. And I think as a psychic, I do remember feeling her presence a lot. She would come up to me kind of in our house beforehand and on our drive over, but I was trying very hard not to talk to her because I didn't want to add that on top of my husband. He was already going through enough already, and to just go ahead and just read and be like, oh, she's here, she's there, she's here, which she totally was. I just felt like that was inappropriate. I kind of went into that situation with the idea that, okay, not going to talk to her, not going to do any of that. I'm just going to be here for my husband. And I think I didn't have any experiences at this one because there wasn't a funeral. They basically just did kind of like, I don't know what it's called, but when it's usually the part that happens before the funeral where they have like pictures up and it's like a room and you can just kind of like come pay your respects and everyone can kind of mingle. Why can't I remember what that's called? But that's basically all she had. And I'm not sure why that was the case. I'm not sure if it was like a money thing or if it was like a religion thing. I really don't know. But I just remember leaving feeling like there wasn't like completion to it. I mean, it's not about me, but just thinking about some of the other people that knew her, I didn't feel like there was a service for her. And that experience actually left me feeling like, okay, you know, I'm not totally against the funeral idea because some people really don't like them. I do think it provides closure for some people and a sense of finality for sure. I think the biggest bummer about that is like I don't have anything. I don't have like a paper. I don't have like a video of the service to remember her by. And that's kind of a bummer to not be able to pass that down to my grandkid or to her grandkids, my kids. And so I do think if you're ever wondering, oh, should we just not do it? I do think it's helpful for a lot of people. That doesn't mean you have to go. So these last two are definitely the bigger ones. And so I think the next funeral after that, I've been to 6 total, 3 being non-psychic, 3 being psychic. And the 5th one, after I was psychic, was my great-grandmother, and she was 91, 92 when she passed away, so it was like a long time coming. Everybody sort of knew it wasn't like a huge surprise. But she was Catholic, and we went to Nebraska for her funeral, and I was sort of dreading the Catholic funeral, but I also knew at that time, and I kind of healed some of my opinions towards churches in general. She had an open casket as well, but I think it was because that was her wish. Again, I didn't go look at her, didn't have any interest in doing that. That's just something that I think I'm always gonna do, personally. What I have found the most interesting about this, because I wanted to connect with her and her energy and sort of, before the funeral, we actually went to her old home and we were going through her stuff. And I was downstairs in the basement, I think with my mom, just going through their old photo albums. Photo album falls to the floor, and it is my baby photo album. Like, just a tiny little one of just me as a baby. I think my mom had made it for them, but literally fell on the floor. And I was just like, oh my gosh, did you just see that happen? I can't remember what my mom did, but my mom also knew at this time that I was psychic, and I even remember her asking me, what is it like to, be around her at this funeral? And we talked about it afterwards. But at the actual funeral, during the ceremony, I sort of set the intention that I was going to connect with her during the ceremony and just kind of see where she was at. And it was so interesting to me because I actually felt like she was waiting to move on until this ceremony happened. And I really kind of wanted to question her and be like, oh, do you still believe in this same God? Do you still believe in this church? And I was, slightly egotistically hoping that she would say no. But I got the exact opposite. I think that she still respected that church. She still respected that religion, even after she passed. And it was so cool to me. I don't know what the heck they did, but they were walking down the aisles with all sorts of objects. And it was, they were saying words that was kind of like, oh, we release you to some extent. And I felt like she was hanging out in that church with us until they pushed her on or gave her some sort of permission. I wish I would have taken better notes on it. I just remember there was a point in the ceremony that I felt like she walked through kind of like a beam of white light and she was gone. And then I couldn't connect with her anytime after that. And so to me, that was very interesting because I thought, okay, when you die, you're on this other side, you're done, you're where you're supposed to be. But it was like she was in a holding place, and she was purposely holding it because of her past religion, and she wanted to go through this ceremony. And to me, that says before she passed, she probably thought about it a lot and how she was going to approach it. And I think in her mind, she totally did go to heaven. I didn't get any sort of negative energy from her. She was a really fantastic woman. Ugh. She's coming in now and she's gonna make me cry. Talking about them can invite them in. She's just being like very thankful right now for me talking about this. And one other thing that I forgot to say is that when we were in the church, I got this image. You know, I was paying attention to the ceremony, but then I was also kind of like connecting to her every now and then and just being like, where are you at? And because I wanted to know. And one time I saw her on the roof of the building, like hammering, like fixing things and nailing things in. I was like, that's kind of odd. Okay. And then later I found out that her and her husband, my great-grandfather, had donated a ton of money to this church and actually helped build this church. And so that was kind of just like a cool piece of validation for me. But every now and then my great-grandmother pops up into my dreams. The last time she popped up into my dream, she was trying to tell me a story about corn. She was like, there's this family joke about corn, and she had it written on a piece of paper, and she was trying to show me in the dream, and I couldn't read the piece of paper. And I was like, what? And so I woke up and I texted my grandma the next morning, her daughter, who's also kind of into this stuff, and I said, hey, is there like a family joke about corn? And my grandma was like, oh my gosh. And then the next time we got together, she told me this story about how my mom tried to plant corn one time and totally like failed at it. And so my grandma and my great-grandmother went out there, I guess, and planted like, they went to the store and bought normal corn, and then they put it in her patch. This was like days later, and they're like, oh, you grew it. And my mom apparently was so mad. And so I think that's incredible that she is giving me memories that, you know, I would have missed otherwise in my dreams. And it was just, that's so cool that, you know, I can still connect with her in that way. And the last funeral, this funeral I went to last year. It was actually about almost exactly a year ago. And this was for my cousin who we lost suddenly. He was younger than me. You guys have probably heard me talk about this in a few of my other videos, but this one was hard because everyone in my family knew I was a medium. I've been doing these videos for several years now, and I've been reading since 2011. Some of my family members have gotten, you know, small little fun readings from me. But this one was hard because my cousin passed away. It was sudden. There was drama surrounding it, and it was just a lot of emotions. It was also difficult for me because when he passed, his body was still alive, but I felt like he kind of detached as a soul. So there was a lot of kind of like trauma with the rest of my family around it because he was holding on for life kind of towards the end, which I would not wish that on anyone. That was extremely rough, and we all kind of had to deal with that. And that was interesting for me as a medium, kind of tuning into him and his energy when he was sort of between worlds. But I will talk about the funeral. I have a few points with this. One of the things that I found interesting is that several of my family members came up to me and said something like, I can't feel him. I can't feel him. And that was interesting for me to learn how to respond to, because I think there's this fear that, oh, you can't feel him once he's on the other side, so therefore he's not there. And, trying to explain to people while they're grieving, literally crying, and, trying to tell them there's this thing called the psychic ability, and just because you can't hear them doesn't mean they can't hear you. And there's this, feeling is clairsentience, and you might not be clairsentient, and so it's just kind of like a mess. It's like, how do I explain this to people efficiently and assuade their fears? But I found that was interesting because a lot of people want to be able to feel that person when they pass, and I don't think they realize that just because you don't feel them doesn't mean they're not there. It's just that your psychic ability might not be honed. Also, you could have a totally awesome psychic ability, but you might just be too emotional. And when you are very emotional, that can kind of block information from coming through because maybe you're so desperate to learn the information. The other thing too is, that spirit might have things to do on the other side. They might be healing in their own way, and they might not be around necessarily to speak to you right then and there when you want to. And so I think that's something that a lot of people absolutely struggle with. But this is when I had to sort of learn the hard way to sort of say no to reading. Not only to sometimes reading family members, but also reading so soon. after someone passed. You really need to let people grieve and have time to heal. I've talked about that in one of my previous videos. But it was very difficult because people wanted to talk to them and they knew I knew I was a psychic, and Lauren is like, during that time, I was everyone's like AOL account. It was like, hey Lauren, tell him this. Hey Lauren, tell him that. And I kind of had to say, hey guys, like, you can tell him, he will hear you. You don't need to come through me. Please don't come through me. But thankfully my family did respect that boundary quite a bit, because, you know, I'm grieving and going through it myself. And I had to very much kind of stop and be like, you know what, I'm not going to read this. If they really, really need to talk to a psychic, they can talk to somebody else. And I referred them to other psychics if they asked. But now it's been a while. I'm okay talking to them about it. I just think it's very important that you understand that if you have a psychic in the family, maybe give them some space. Also, if you are the psychic in the family, give them space. Don't indulge in that reading right away. That can be extremely confusing on so many levels. And I really think that people need to learn how to get through it on their own. And you know, there's this whole other ethical boundary of not reading family members, especially when there's drama involved. And I think the best example that I learned from all of this is like, okay, well, I could read you. You are further along in your kind of grief journey from this, and I could be giving you all this information about what this spirit is saying. But what about this person over here? They're not ready to hear those things yet. They're not ready to understand that, you know, that these things are happening. And, you know, if this person comes and just dumps all this information when this other person isn't ready, it can be very traumatic. And so I think you really have to pull back and not read family as much as you can, especially in a moment like this. The actual funeral, though, I decided that I wasn't really going to read him. I was worried it was going to overwhelm me, so I said kind of no, like, we're not going to talk. But when I was in there and watching the service and felt comfortable, I did take a few moments every now and then to tune into him and where he was. And he was kind of up on the stage a few times, and I would see him clairvoyantly. And I feel like there was a few times where he was totally like mocking the pastor. And I just like was kind of laughing, smiling to myself, because like that was totally his energy. What was hardest was when there were people that read letters to him and got up on the stage, and that I could feel him like responding to every line. I heard it. It was just like his response. It was like he was trying to scream at them, like, this is what I have to say in return. And that was the hardest part of the whole funeral. And it was probably because I'm open to them and their emotions about the situation. You know, they're so emotional. And then I'm getting feedback from him in my ear. And that was hard for me to shut off, but I had the tools in my back pocket. I knew how to do it, and it wasn't a problem. Afterwards, they had kind of like a reception, I would call it, at like a local event center, and they had like food and drinks, and everyone just kind of hung out and remembered him in his name. And I do remember asking before I went there, I was like, is there anything you want us to do to remember you by? And I saw him, I think he told me, you know, have a shot for me. And so just remember that. But at that ceremony reception, it was bizarre because I felt like I kept seeing him everywhere. Like I would do this double take because I thought I saw his face. And then I would do another double take because in my peripherals, I thought I saw him again. But it would be just like another guy that looked maybe sort of similar. And I hadn't had that happen at a funeral before. It was a very interesting phenomenon. And I stopped and I asked, using my psychic abilities, like, why is this happening? And it was like, because he's here and you are seeing him, and I'm just, you know, naturally more clairvoyant. So of course I'm going to pick up those little images of him. And what was crazy was I mentioned this to my mom. You know, we were kind of off alone, and I was like, I feel like I keep seeing him everywhere. Like, I feel like I do this double take and I thought I saw him and then he's not there. My mom goes, that same thing is happening to me. I've had that so many times. And so she was experiencing that too. She's not exactly psychic, I would say. I mean, she's open to it, but the fact that somebody like her is validating that was crazy to me, because it was like, okay, yeah, he's definitely here. He's trying to make himself seen. And then I was later talking to my sister and I said, I don't know if this is like too much to ask. I didn't want to break that ethical boundary, but I was saying, I think we should drink in his honor. I think we should have shots. And my sister is also pretty open with me saying these things. And I said, I feel like that's what he wants us to do. And then my sister goes, she's like, that's what so-and-so said. She felt too. And so my cousin, his sister, apparently was already getting shots, like literally that second. She walks up and says, hey, we're going to have shots in his name. And my sister and I just look at each other like, is anyone else watching this? Is anyone else seeing this? There was just like so many validating synchronicities that day, which was just kind of cool to see that happen between multiple family members. And to me, that says like he's really around. He was really trying to communicate with us. And so when we all had shots later, I think we stood in a circle, we, raised the shot glass, and he was there. He was over my shoulder. I can't remember what he said, but I think I just remember his energy just being like, yeah. Like, kind of like, bro, like, he was happy that he could get us all to do that for him. So he was very much present in more so than any other of the funerals that I went to, and I think that's because he was so concerned about everybody. Again, his passing was sudden. I think he felt awful about it. I think he wanted to communicate with everyone. He was so present. He was so worried about everyone that's why I was able to feel him so much more at that funeral. I don't think anything else happened with him at that funeral. I've, stayed connected with him in spirit a lot. I've talked about him a lot in my videos, and I think he's a pretty big part of some of the things that I've learned and how I've experienced spirits passing. And so that funeral and that whole experience was a big learning lesson for me as a medium. And it was so great because last week we had a memorial for him. We just kind of all got together as a family. We released some balloons and people wrote letters. I kind of did a candle magic thing for my family, and everyone kind of grieved again in their own way together. And it was a really great time where we were all just again sitting in the presence of each other and honoring this person. And I think that is so helpful both for the people grieving, because you're still grieving a year later, you're going to grieve, years from now. And so I think sometimes people need more than a funeral, for sure. But even at that event, even still today, I kind of tell him, hey, no, we're not going to communicate with the family. The only way we are going to communicate is if they come to me. And that's kind of just the rule now that I set with him. But that doesn't mean he's still in my ear, talking to me, telling me to say things. I just have to be very like, hey, no, we're not doing that. I will also say here too, just like another thing that happens with me with funerals. Obviously, I am like the family videographer. I have a production company, like I'm just the video person. And so all of these funerals, almost all of them, not all of them, I was also having to do the videos for like the funeral service ahead of time. But that's also another difficulty because I'm ahead of time looking through all of their photos, trying to make just this simple collage of their whole life. And it's like, as I'm making it, usually almost always they're talking to me and telling me, don't put in that photo or put in this one or do that one after this, or it's funny because I've got like a backseat spirit editor, I swear. And that's also hard just because I'm going through those emotions and being forced to kind of like deal with it all ahead of everyone else because I'm making these videos. And so I'm extra empathic because I'm connected with them already. So I don't know what my point was there other than like, I really have to like extra set my boundaries going into these things. Now I will say, moving into the future, I don't honestly even want to think about it, but I do know that there will inevitably be more funerals. And if I'm still here making videos on my channel, hopefully I can come back and talk about them more in detail. So if you have any questions on how I experience it, let me know in the comments below. I'll try to keep it in mind for next time that happens. I hope it's years and years and years from now and never. But I do think it's a very interesting thing to sit through as a medium, especially because you're you're questioning, you have all these existential things of like, where are they going? You know, are they here? Are they in hell? What do they think about this? Where are they? Am I even really connecting with them, or am I just making things up? I think, if anything, funerals really question and test my ability to trust my own intuitive abilities and what I'm getting. Now, if you do want to learn a bit more about some of the psychic experiences that I have had in the past, I do have a member video that's up, and I kind of went through all the psychic experiences that I had as a kid, basically leading up until I started learning how to become a psychic. So if you like this video, you might like that one. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that this was interesting and possibly helpful. And again, leave me any questions or comments that you have in the comments below. I feel like I'm missing things that I might have experienced, but it might make for a good video in the future. All right, guys, remember to look out for my next Halloween video next week. We're going to continue this Halloween fun for just a little bit longer. But thank you guys so much for watching. Remember to subscribe, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.